everyone, and welcome to Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary, where we do animal training and behavior modification. My name is Lori, and I'm going to talk to you about what it is that we do here, the concepts that we do that by, and some of the principles that we adhere to. Key concepts for us here at Behavior Education are that the laws of learning apply to all species. It doesn't matter what type of animal it is, behavior science is going to be the same no matter the species. We look to welfare science on a regular basis, as well as behavior science, to inform us regarding evidence-based best practices. Well, what exactly does that mean? You might hear these terms here at Behavior Education. We use them a lot, or you may hear them on other YouTube channels or in other classes or websites. And it's important that you understand these really do mean something. If you hear the words science-based, research-based, or evidence-based, it means that the best practices have been developed from information that was obtained through rigorous scientific studies, and that the best practices were developed from methods that were demonstrated effective during this rigorous research. It also means that the methods were derived from and informed by objective evidence. It means that researchers went into this with no preconceived notions, and they accepted the facts as they arose through the scientific method. It means that information has been vetted by peer review, and that may be journal articles or YouTube videos or courses or educational material in books or magazines or videos that are produced in mass. It also means that the outcomes can be independently duplicated, and that's really important. It means that if you take one of these studies or one of these training trials or behavior trials and you try to replicate it, or another organization that works in the field tries to replicate it using the same methods, that you're going to get the same results. And we do that on an informal basis here all the time. We take some of these behavior concepts, these training concepts, we apply them to the animals that we work with here, and we see that they work. Now, not every single method is going to work for every single animal because they're living things and they're all individuals, and we'll talk about that. It also means that practices will change based on the newest empirical data and evidence. That means that we will change how we do things based on new information as it arises. We aren't going to hold to ideas that we used yesterday if we find out that there's a new, better way today that is less intrusive and more effective in working with the animals. Our approach here, as you might have guessed already, is that we work with animals as family. And each one of the animals we work with, we look at as an individual member of that family. We're flexible. We adapt everything we do to meet the needs of each individual that's here. We treat everyone as an individual family member, and that doesn't matter what type of animal it is, human or non-human. We treat everyone as family, and we treat them as individuals. We use the least intrusive, most effective, available avenues to achieve all of the care we do, the training we do, and any behavior modification that we are trying to do. And we always strive for fear-free interactions. We realize that that's not always possible 100% of the time, but it's our goal to keep fear, anxiety, and distress to a minimum or eliminate it completely whenever possible. We focus on cooperative behaviors. That means that we guide animals to voluntarily participate in their own care. And ideally, that results in a calm care experience for everyone involved. That means the animals and the handlers and any service providers that we need to bring in, like farriers or veterinarians or other trainers. We offer animals as much choice and control as possible while maintaining their safety and ours. Improving lives and relationships is our goal here. We want to make sure that animals have good relationships with their humans so that they live long, happy lives together, so that the animals aren't rehomed, sometimes several times, My work started as a veterinary receptionist and later veterinary assistant. And later I moved into the rescue world and the sanctuary world. My degree is in zookeeping technology, but I work heavily with rescue animals and with special needs and at-risk animals of all different species. And so keeping all of these things in mind, behavior, temperament, and trainability, we try to make sure that smooth relationships are built between humans and their animals. So we work a lot with animals that are sent to us or that we consult on that have what humans term as behavior issues, and they need behavior or psychological rehabilitation because they've been brought into rescue and they need to be adoptable to new homes. Let's talk about these three things and what they mean. Well, what's behavior? Behavior is absolutely everything an animal does. It's everything we as people do, and it's everything an animal does. So it's the way an animal interacts in response to its environment. It's all of the things that any living organism does when it interacts with others, when it interacts with any stimulus or responds to any situation. So when given the opportunity, ideally animals should express normal behaviors that are consistent with their natural history, their natural biology, and their individual history. Now, when encountering novelty, that means new objects or new situations, they may express new behaviors outside the realm of their natural history. Remember that many of the animals we work with are still wild animals, and that they may do things under captive management, and they may encounter things under captive management that they wouldn't encounter in their wild living situation. So that means that they are going to possibly demonstrate new behaviors to us, but they're going to be meaningful in some way to that individual animal. Now, when something isn't right, the animal may deviate from what's normal or what could be considered normal when encountering novelty, and they might express unusual behaviors, which are called stereotypies. Now, this can happen if an animal is distressed, afraid, physically uncomfortable, if they're not feeling well, or if they lack opportunities to express their natural behaviors. A lot of people ask me when I mention stereotypies, well, did you mean stereotypes? And no, I don't. Stereotypes are ideas that we have about certain people or certain types of animals in our head as to how we think that they should behave. Stereotypies are something different. So let's talk about what that is really quickly. The definition of stereotypies from a zoo animal glossary is going to be rhythmic, repetitive, fixed, predictable, purposeful, but purposeless movements. Well, what does that mean, purposeful but purposeless? Basically, stereotypies are repetitive behaviors that an animal does over and over again that don't seem to have any practical function when we look at it. But it has some practical function to the animal or they wouldn't be doing it. Now, those practical functions aren't necessarily healthy. And so these behaviors are things that they come up with in order to better adapt to an environment that they have no control over or that they feel stressed in, or I should say distressed in. And these behaviors are things that they do to expel excess energy or nervousness, or it gives them something to do instead of sitting there being distressed. And so stereotypies that are commonly seen, for example, in snakes are going to be things like nose rubbing, edging, glass surfing, pushing the nose against surfaces, excessive interaction with the walls or with transparent boundaries, or excessive exploration and darting around of the habitat. Stereotypies that are typically seen in horses are going to be things like pacing, head tossing, pawing, cribbing, swaying, wood chewing, and eating non-food substances. One of the things that you may be familiar with in horses is this behavior of swaying. It means that the horse sways back and forth repetitively on each of their front legs, and they shift their weight back and forth. They might swing their head from side to side. And another really common behavior is the one pictured here, which is the horse cribbing or even wind sucking. So they'll put their front teeth on that edge, they'll open their mouth, and they'll suck wind in. These are all aberrant behaviors that we don't want to see in the animals because it means that something is wrong. Something is just not right with their health, with their environment. And when I say with their health, that doesn't just mean physical health. It may mean with their mental and emotional health and well-being as well. Now let's move on to the next thing in that list. And remember, our list was behavior, temperament, and trainability. The next thing I want to talk about is temperament. We all have a specific temperament that we were just born with, and it's innate with each individual. So some people are more shy, some people are very boisterous and outgoing, and it's the way that we just tend to be naturally. Now, it doesn't mean that someone who is shy, whether that's a person or an animal, can't learn to overcome some of that shyness, but they're always going to be just a little bit shy. It's just part of their nature. And so temperament are these biologically based behaviors that are totally independent of learning. Now, again, they can be modified to some extent, but for the most part, if you're a confident individual, that's just the way you are. If you're a shy individual, that is just the way you are, and you can overcome some of it, but you're always pretty much going to be shy. Some other examples of temperament: self-confidence, impulsivity, neuroticism, plasticity, social endurance, mental endurance, physical endurance, and resiliency. These are things that organisms are just born with, and they just have a predisposition to be this way. Two parts of an organism's temperament that become really important when we talk about training and behavior modification are plasticity and resilience. So plasticity is the adaptability of an organism to changes in its environment or to differences between its various habitats. I show a picture of a cat here because they have a lot of plasticity. That means that they are highly adaptable individuals. They're adaptable in their diet, they're adaptable in their behavior, they're adaptable in the environments that they're capable of living in, which means temperature, climate, and they can live very well in wild environments. We see feral cat colonies all the time, and they live and adapt very well to urban environments. So cats are a species that originated in the Near East. That is where the domestic cat should still be, but they have flourished so much worldwide because they have so much natural plasticity built into their biology. They're just highly adaptable to a variety of diets and circumstances and climates. And the second thing I want to mention is the importance of natural resilience. So some organisms are just naturally more resilient than others. That's true for people. It's true for all animals. And basically, it's just a natural innate toughness. It's how quickly does an individual recover from difficulties? Or when something aversive happens, how quickly do you bounce back and move on? And resiliency, as you might imagine, along with plasticity, are very important concepts in training and behavior modification, because the more adaptable an organism is and the more resilience an organism has, the more quickly that they are going to be on board with the training program. It means that if something unusual happens during a training session, the animal is going to be less affected by that adversely, and they're going to bounce back from it more quickly and move on in the training, versus an animal with less resiliency or that's maybe less adaptable. So let's say that we're trying to teach a dog or a snake to station on a platform, and during the training session something happens and they accidentally fall off. A highly resilient animal is going to just blow that off and get right back on the platform and move on with the training as if nothing happened. And an animal that doesn't have so much resilience may be very adversely affected by that experience of falling off, and they may not want to station back on that platform again for a very long time. You really may have to back your training up several steps and start all over until that animal builds up the confidence to station on the platform again, just from that one experience that happened of them falling off. This brings us to trainability. Trainability is just the ability of an animal to learn a skill or activity through guided shaping, instruction, or practice. What does that mean? We as living beings are learning all of the time. We're constantly learning through all of the experiences and all of the interactions we have with our environment and everything in it, including the other organisms in it. And so all that training is guided learning. And an animal's trainability or a person's trainability means how well they are adapting to that guided learning. So how well am I able to allow someone to guide me to learn a new skill or a new behavior? And so in animals, trainability is that same thing. It's how well does that animal just naturally take to being guided to learn something new, whether it's a behavior or a skill or new knowledge when it comes to people and some other animals. Real quickly, I want to go over what learning is, because that's basically what we're talking about here. We are talking about helping animals to learn new skills or new behaviors. So learning is the acquisition of knowledge or skills through experience. Learning is to gain an understanding of something through experience. Learning is a change in behavior due to experience, or a process of developing a new understanding, knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, attitudes, and preferences through experiences. What is the key word in all four of those bullet points I read? It's experiences. So we as organisms learn all the time through the things that we experience in our world. Learning is just innate. It happens with all living things. It can't be helped. And organisms are learning even when we don't mean for them to be. So that's why when we are guiding an animal through learning a new skill or behavior, we need to be very careful what we're reinforcing, because if we reinforce a behavior we don't want, that would be bad from our perspective. But because animals are learning all the time, we can inadvertently teach them things that we don't mean to, and it's just something that we want to be very careful about. So there are lots and lots of ways to learn. They're often related, they're often combined. Some of these are even the same thing, just worded differently, and I'm not going to go through each one of these. Just be aware that when you hear discussions of learning, you might hear some of the words in this list mentioned. There are all different types of learning. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Associative learning is something that snakes and other animals are very good at. It means that they learn to associate a thing or a behavior with a reward or punishment, which we call a reinforcement. Rote learning, which is in the middle list, is just memorization. So that means that you just read something over and over until you memorize it. That's what rote means. And formal versus non-formal learning is kind of what I've already explained. Formal learning is you are being guided to learn a new skill or behavior, or you are the teacher guiding someone else or an animal to do a new skill or behavior. And non-formal learning are just those things we learn through experiences in our environment that just happen. So why do all these things we just talked about matter in the first place? We talked about behavior, temperament, and trainability, and how they are all very much related to the things that we do here at Behavior Education. All of these things play a really vital role in aspects of our relationship with animals that we care for and animals that we interact with in other venues. So as keepers, trainers, and family members to these animals, we need to be adapting every interaction we have with them based on their individual character traits, their individual behavior, their individual temperament, their individual trainability. And we have to consider these traits in order to support our learners in the best possible way. By working with an animal's individual inclinations, we're able to develop a training plan and decide on appropriate training methods that are going to best suit that individual learner. So for example, an animal that's very confident and outgoing, that was just born with a lot of natural resilience, is going to be successful in different learning situations and using different learning styles than a very, very shy animal who tends to be on the nervous side and maybe isn't all that resilient naturally. So we're going to have to base our approach with each learner on their individual personality traits and characteristics. And those come from knowing the individual's behavior, temperament, and trainability. This is something that I want you to keep in mind. Choice and control over outcomes meaningful to them can make all the difference in the world in how animals interact with us and how they respond to training. We want to keep things positive, calm, and drama-free whenever possible. Important things to remember. We are family caretakers and teachers to these animals. We expect them to function in a human world, and so it's our responsibility to help them learn how to do that. We should be guiding their experience in order to support learning how to trust and be family members, learning our behavior at the same time that we're learning theirs. We should be helping them to learn how to communicate with us, and at the same time, we should be learning how to communicate with them. We should learn how to work with them in a way that helps them voluntarily participate in their own care. And we need to help them in learning new skills through training. So examples of this are stationing on a platform, which are pictured at right. One of our dogs, Monroe, is stationed on a platform, and one of our snakes, Rodney, is stationed on a platform. Now that might seem like a simple behavior, teaching an animal to just wait on a platform or station themselves on a platform, but it can be generalized for so many other things, such as being weighed on a scale, being on an x-ray table for radiographics, diagnostics, or being on a table for an ultrasound examination, or many other circumstances where the animal might have to be on some kind of a platform or surface. If they've already learned to station on a platform, that behavior again can be generalized to all of these other circumstances, and that's just one example. So unless there are exigent circumstances, we do not, under any other circumstances, use or advocate force, flooding, or physical punishment. Exigent circumstances are emergencies. Those are those life or death situations that if we don't do this now, the animal's going to die. That might be evacuating. It might be rushing them off to the vet. Those are emergencies, and in those cases, we do what we have to do to help the animal. Things that are not emergencies are enclosure cleanings, nail trimming, vaccinations, changing water, putting the animal in a car to go to an outreach, or putting the animal in a car to go to the dog park, putting a horse in a trailer because we want to go on a trail ride. None of those things are emergencies, and we should under no circumstances in those situations be using force, flooding, or physical punishment. Those things have to be reserved for situations that are emergencies, for animals that haven't learned cooperative behaviors yet. And so we just have to do what we have to do in order to save their lives. So our goals here, why we advocate this so strongly, is that we want smooth relationships between animals and their people, and we want productive learning outcomes. Because when productive learning outcomes happen, people are happier with their animals, and their animals have much better experiences under captive management. Remember that animals are living, thinking beings. They have emotional lives. They're not with us by choice, other than maybe dogs, arguably, who have probably co-evolved with people, and part of that was their choice. But most animals, including wild animals that you would see in zoological institutions, or wild animals like snakes and other reptiles that we keep in our homes, haven't chosen to be here because they want to be with us. We have forced them into a captive environment. They're under human care, not by their own fault or by their own choice. And given those circumstances, we need to strive to be their caretaker, not their captor. Freedom is very reinforcing for all organisms. This goes for human and non-human animals. So the ability to say no and opt out of participating in whatever it is we're asking them to do is really important to build a trusting relationship between us and our animals. So passive habituation, gradual desensitization, eventually active habituation, and a lot of patience on our part are key. Very, very important in having a smooth long-term relationship with our animals. Some of these animals live a long time. So a dog could live 15 years, some snakes live 30 years or more, some horses live 30 years or more. It is worth taking the time now, even if it's a year or two, to go through this gradual process and build trust with our animal, and then have another 18 or 25 years after that where we have a really enriching, smooth relationship with them, free of drama and free of distress for them or us. So during every interaction that you have with your animal, these are the things that we encourage you to focus on. What's the least intrusive or least invasive thing you can do to accomplish that behavior change, to accomplish that husbandry task that you need to do in the most effective manner? This also includes veterinary care, just anything you have to do with the animal. If I have to trim the horse's feet, what's the least intrusive, most effective way to do it with this individual horse? And that may be different than how we would do it with another horse. Or if I have to accomplish giving a snake an injection, what's the least intrusive, most effective way to do that that's going to minimize fear, anxiety, and distress in the animal and keep us safe? Please try to remember to think of freedom, not force, cooperation and kindness, and consider consent. That means see if the animal will consent to participating in their own care versus being forced. And that can certainly be accomplished through time and training. Again, if it's an emergency, that's going to be something different. Here is my contact information and a list of some of my certifications. If you have any further questions for me, I encourage you to contact me through the contact form on my website at behavioreducation.org, or you can email me at behavioreducationllc@gmail.com. You can also find me on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you so much for your time today. And until we meet again, or I should say until we interact again, please remember to be kind and love your animals.